right for the unborn. The Biden administration recently made it easier for people to access abortion pills. How pro-life lawmakers are responding. Voting rights. The president and vice president traveled to Georgia to push for change in election law. We have a report and reaction. Inside the numbers. Analysis of recent polls on President Joe Biden and his approval rating. And breaking the ice. Why researchers in Antarctica say they want to drill several thousand feet through a frozen surface. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, January 11th, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Joe Biden has his sights set on voting legislation, specifically the proposed John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. Both are stalled and Republicans reject the legislation. But now, in a highly controversial move, the president backs changing the Senate filibuster rules in order to push his agenda through. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
Tracy, good evening to you. Facing intense political pressure tonight to act and not just talk, President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris flew to Georgia today to support passage of voting rights legislation. Opponents, however, don't want any part of it, calling it essentially a power grab.
Heading to Marine One this morning ahead of his planned voting rights speech in Atlanta, President Joe Biden is asked what he risks politically when he knows the state of the Senate.
I risk not saying what I believe. That's what I risk. This is one of those defining moments. It really is. People are going to be judged. Where were they before and where were they after the vote?
But even some voting rights advocates are not exactly thrilled with the president's approach.
But at this point, we don't need another speech. We don't need him to come to Georgia and use us as a prop. What we need is work.
Some Democrats claim Republicans are trying to disenfranchise black voters. But Florida Senator Marco Rubio recently tweeted, "In America, it's never been easier to vote than it is today." And Senate Republicans warned in a tweet, Democrats want to silence millions of Americans by eliminating the filibuster.
Current Senate rules require 60 votes to advance most legislation, including voting rights, to make sure big changes have broad support. But not all Democrats support changing the filibuster rules.
Former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, who is now leading the Election Transparency Initiative, says it's all about power.
And unfortunately, his Democrat team, not all of it, but large chunks of it, want a Washington election takeover so they can control this all from Washington, which has never happened in American history.
And Ken Cuccinelli says President Biden is driving wedges rather than working across the aisle.
This is a partisan political takeover of elections that the president is pushing. And he does it under historic and great sounding phrases like voting rights. It is not voting rights to eliminate voter ID. You don't improve voting rights, you water them down.
The Democrats' voting legislation would usher in the biggest overhaul of U.S. elections in a generation and create national election standards. Republicans resolutely reject having that happen. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
All right, and joining me now is Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics. Tom, great to see you. As we just heard from Owen, President Biden is, as you know, in Georgia advocating for changing the Senate's filibuster rules in order to help pass the voting rights legislation. I want to get your thoughts on that and also the criticism that he's receiving for that visit to Georgia.
Well, regarding the doing away with the legislative filibuster, this is something that, you know, in Congress, the minority is always usually in favor of supporting the filibuster. And Democrats, we've seen clips of Chuck Schumer from 2004 as late as 2017. Biden has been on record supporting the filibuster. And Democrats used the filibuster extensively during President Trump's administration. And now they're painting it as somehow a relic of Jim Crow or violating the will of the people. And so it is quite a change for Democrats. And as some people have warned them, as early as this November, they could be back in the minority. It might rue the decision to do away with the filibuster if they could even do it. But by all indications of where the senators stand now, including Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, and even a few other Democrats who have expressed reservations about this, it doesn't look like it's going anywhere in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, and what do you think about that visit down to Georgia? Your thoughts on that?
Well, look, the Biden White House has clearly shifted gears now, and they are done with Build Back Better, which is seemingly dead, and have moved on to the next piece of their agenda. And he showcased that last week during the January 6th speech, and this is sort of the sequel to that. They are going to push this, but again, it may be a dead end legislatively if they can't get anything done. But clearly, this is they have decided to shift gears and focus on voting rights in an effort to, I think, really energize the base of the Democratic Party, which has become dispirited over the past few months, watching Democrats in Washington squabble over their inability to get anything through the Congress. And so I think this is really about re-energizing the Democratic base in what is now an election year.
Yeah, and now I want to talk about the president's approval ratings, which, as you know, have been really steadily declining. Now, I guess, sitting at around 42%. What do you think is behind those low poll numbers? And is it uncommon to have those low poll numbers so early in a presidency?
Well, it's not. I mean, at this point, Donald Trump was at about 39%, so Biden's a bit above him. Obama was at about 48% at this point in time during his first term in office. So his numbers aren't historically terrible, but they're not great, and they have declined rather significantly. And the reason for that is twofold. It is clearly his administration's inability to deliver on their promise to quash the virus. They're still continuing to struggle. They're struggling even more now than they were at the beginning of the administration. And the other, perhaps even more important thing, is their inability to get a handle on inflation. This is something we had a poll come out yesterday that showed it is the #1 concern among the American people. It continues to grow as a concern, and the administration has not addressed that in a urgent way for the American people. And so those are the two reasons. But the bigger problem is that for Biden, in many respects, is that he's lost the trust of the American people. They no longer think he's competent. They no longer think he is a strong leader. A lot of those intangibles, they don't think he's trustworthy anymore. Some people don't think he's up to the job. And so for those reasons, once those intangibles have slipped away, those are the things that are really hard to get back, regardless of how things start to play out in this election year.
Yeah, another thing I want to touch on, too, is the fact that President Biden has had fewer news conferences than any of the last 5 presidents had in their first year. Tom, why do you think that is? And what do you think that signals, not just to the media, but also to the American people?
Well, the White House argues that he's taken more informal questions than a lot of past presidents. And so this is a sort of a misleading statistic or metric to judge him by in terms of formal press conferences. But look, the administration, this goes all the way back to the campaign, have been very careful, very guarded with Joe Biden putting him out in front of the press in unscripted environments where he's answering questions. He's, even when he does do press conferences, he has a pretty clear script of who he's going to call on ahead of time. And so this has been part of their strategy from the beginning. They want to kind of limit his exposure. And that, I think that's going to continue. I don't see that changing. I don't think any criticism from anyone about the few number of press conferences that it had is going to suddenly change the White House's feeling on their strategy with regard to Biden and the press.
Tom, before I let you go, real quick, what else are you following right now?
Well, I mean, personally, we're following Real Clear Politics, and this is an issue close to me, being in Chicago. The shutdowns, the Chicago Teachers Union, the kids are finally going back to school. The teachers are going back to school. But we've seen this not just in Chicago, but in other localities around the country. Schools are struggling to stay open, and parents are very worried about people going, backsliding into online learning, especially now 2 years in, that we know how much damage that caused the kids. So keeping kids in schools is an issue that we're focused on here at Real Clear Politics.
All right, Tom, thank you so much. Always great to be with you and get your analysis.
Thanks, Tracy.
Well, the Biden administration has made access to abortion pills easier. Many patients can now get them in the mail, and no more in-person visits are required with specific health care providers. Pro-life lawmakers say this is dangerous public policy. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
The Food and Drug Administration has given the green light to expand access to abortion pills. It's as easy as opening up your mailbox. Some Republican lawmakers say it's another example of the Biden administration's push for abortion on demand.
This is very consistent with what the administration is calling for. They call for removal of Hyde protections, for instance. They're calling for refunding international abortions.
Congressman Andy Harris, who is a medical doctor, tells me these abortion pills have serious side effects.
These are serious medications. This isn't a Motrin. This isn't a Tylenol. These are medications that do have very serious consequences. Hemorrhage, one of the most serious.
But pro-abortion Senator Patty Murray, a Catholic, praised the FDA's decision. Quote, "I'm so relieved that the experts at the FDA are lifting some of these restrictions and making it easier for patients to get and take medication abortion." 2019 data from 47 states shows 42% of all abortions and 54% of abortions before 10 weeks occurred through pills.
The bottom line is these are human lives, and there's a movement in this country that doesn't want to respect human life from the moment of conception till natural birth.
Pro-life Catholic Congressman Alex Mooney of West Virginia tells me defending the culture of life is more important than ever.
The radical pro-abortion movement is going to do anything they can to keep abortion frequent as possible in any way possible. And so they're undercutting any state's pro-life laws, essentially, by allowing these pills to be mailed.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops released a statement saying in part, quote, "The FDA ought to act to protect the lives and health of mothers and children rather than merely succumbing to the abortion industry's pressure to loosen safety standards." By the way, the FDA's decision doesn't override regulations in 19 states to require doctors to be physically present when prescribing abortion pills. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, the president of the EU Parliament has died as the continent confronts record numbers of COVID cases. The Italian Diocese of Reggio Emilia Gustava has a new shepherd. Pope Francis has appointed Archbishop Giacomo Morandi to the historic diocese northwest of Bologna. Archbishop Morandi has been serving as the secretary for the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. As coronavirus prevention, an Italian bishop is forbidding unvaccinated priests and Eucharistic ministers from distributing Holy Communion in his diocese. Bishop Giacomo Cirilli is a medical school graduate who also recovered from COVID-19 a year ago. He has further restricted in-person ministries to comply with Italy's guidelines. As for COVID's impact across Europe last week, the highly infectious Omicron variant has resulted in more than 7 million new cases, with the spread predicted to worsen.
At this rate, the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation forecasts that more than 50% of the population in the region will be infected with Omicron in the next 6 to 8 weeks.
The WHO Regional Director for Europe says these infection rates will add stress to healthcare systems. North Korea launched a ballistic missile today, one that South Korean military leaders say may be even more advanced than the hypersonic missile the country launched. While this comes as airports on the West Coast were briefly ordered to a full ground stop yesterday, potentially in connection with North Korea launching a ballistic missile. Planes were halted from takeoff after receiving a notice from the North Korean Aerospace Defense Command. According to CNN Business, the missile launch was detected and determined not to be a threat, allowing flights to resume. And joining me now to discuss is Michael Baker, former CIA Covert Operations Officer and CEO of the global intelligence firm Portman Square Group. Mike, great to see you. Thank you so much for coming on. I want to talk more about these missile launches by North Korea. How concerned should the U.S. be? And do you think this is just maybe military flexing here, their muscle, or do you think this is a real threat to the U.S.?
Well, it's a really good question you ask. It's a very complicated question. In a sense, in one way, it is just a flex on the part of the North Korean regime. If they do this from time to time, they've got a track record of whenever they're feeling neglected or not respected by the global community or not being paid attention to, then typically they'll fire off a rocket. I mean, it's just I don't want to oversimplify this, but they do tend to throw their teddy out of the crib whenever they feel as if they're not getting the attention that they, in their minds, deserve. But it is disconcerting, and it is something that we always need to be concerned about, in the sense that nothing happens in North Korea without China's involvement. The reason why the North Korean regime exists is because of China. That's it. That's the only way that they survive as a regime. So it's the weapons technology transfer between China and North Korea, and then ongoing between North Korea and Iran, between China and other nations, including, worryingly, Saudi Arabia, which is using China to build their ballistic missile capability at the same time as China is increasing their economic and other cooperation with Iran. So there's this interconnected web that does make it a national security concern to us. But typically when they fire off a missile, it is a demonstration of their desire to be paid attention to.
A lot of concerns, Mike. I want to go back to what you mentioned about China and North Korea. Kim Jong-un recently praised outgoing Chinese ambassador for the improving relationship between China and North Korea. Can you sort of expand upon that, and how concerned do you think the U.S. and the rest of the world should be with that relationship?
Well, it's always a concern from our perspective. For decades now, U.S. administrations have viewed North Korea as sort of under the thumb of the Chinese regime. And to some degree, that is true. They depend on them for their economic survival. But there have been occasions in the past where it appears as if the Chinese authorities don't have the degree of control over the North Korean regime that we imagine them to have. Look, the last thing the Chinese regime wants, the G wants, is for instability in North Korea. The idea that suddenly somehow North Korea would just collapse and you would have millions of refugees streaming across into China looking for support or resources. That is a primary concern, and so that is one reason why they continue to prop up the North Korean regime. In a sense, they're kind of stuck with them.
And Mike, another thing I want to talk about and get your perspective on is Ukraine. As you know, there's talks taking place this week in Geneva in regards to Ukraine and Russia. What's your perspective on that?
Well, look, I think Putin is getting what he wants. He wants a world stage in which to express his displeasure over the idea that perhaps the Ukraine would continue cozying up to NATO, or that NATO would somehow encroach on what Putin views as his buffer zone. Look, everything that happens with the Ukraine and Putin has to be viewed through Putin's lens, which is he very much regrets the collapse of the Soviet Union, and he very much wants to rebuild in some fashion the former Soviet Union. So this is sort of a play by Putin to demonstrate that it's not worth the pain or potential pain by having the Ukraine consider NATO membership and by having NATO continue to cozy up to the Ukraine. I don't think there's a military invasion in the works. Not that I believe. I mean, look, Putin and Rybakov, the deputy foreign minister, they've said, oh, we don't have any intention of military invasion. I don't believe anything that they say, but just stepping back and putting their words aside, I don't believe it's in Putin's best interest to engage in a military invasion of the Ukraine. So I think that's why he would kind of stop short of that. But he is definitely in a power play right now, and he's testing the Biden administration as well.
Well, Mike, unfortunately, we have to leave it right there. Thank you so much. Great to get your analysis today.
Sure. Thank you.
Our European Parliament President David Sassoli has passed away at a hospital in Italy at the age of 65. He had suffered pneumonia last September, which had weakened his health. He had been in the hospital since late December with immune system complications. A former journalist, Sassoli was first elected to the European Parliament in 2009, becoming its president in 2019. Up next, celebrating Children's Missionary Day, bringing the Catholic faith to young people. Now, the Feast of the Epiphany, celebrated earlier this month, honors the revelation of God incarnate as Jesus Christ. For one group associated with the Vatican, it also means something else. The Pontifical Society of the Holy Childhood uses January 6th as Children's Missionary Day. Founded in 1843, the organization is present in more than 130 countries around the world. It seeks to bring the Catholic faith to young people, especially those most in need. Joining us now from Rome is Sister Roberta Tremarelli, General Secretary of the Pontifical Society of the Holy Childhood. Sister Roberta, thank you so much for your time today. Can you tell us more about the Missionary Day for Children and why was it held on January 6th?
Okay. The Missionary Children's Day is the opportunity to the missionary children all over the world to share their belonging to the Universal Church as missionary disciples of Jesus. This is the day where the children and the adolescents celebrate the Pontifical Society of Holy Childhood. Usually, this day is celebrated in the Feast of Epiphany, but not all the countries in the world celebrate this Missionary Children's Day in the same date, because the Pope left to all the dioceses and the country free to decide the date. Usually the Pope, in his message on the Angelus, remember this feast for the missionary children, because the Epiphany is a missionary feast where Jesus manifest himself to all the nation. And also the Epiphany is the feast for the children. Pope Pio XII, in a letter on December 1950, asked to all the bishops to celebrate this day to promote the Society of Missionary Children, but left free on the day.
And I understand also the Holy Father released a message for Missionary Day. Can you talk to us more about that and what he said?
In the same day of the Epiphany, we received the message for the World Mission Day with the invitation, "You shall be my witnesses," and with reference to the message of the risen Christ to his disciple. You will receive power from the Holy Spirit, and you will be my witness to the end of the earth. This message can help us to grow in our missionary spirituality all along the year, because the World Mission Sunday is celebrated the same day in the month of October. But every day we are in charge to be missionary in the prayer, that is the first missionary action, in the offering, in the witness, in the sacrifice.
And Sister, before I let you go, can you talk to us a little bit about the work that you do and some of the projects that you are working on for the new year?
For this year, we will celebrate an important anniversary. 100 of the Holy Childhood become pontifical. Pontifical means that we are of the Pope. We work for the Universal Church. And so for this, the Pontifical Mission Society are not only a subsidy or project to help to help the church, the young church in the missionary territories, but we are in charge also for the animation and the formation in every country. Specifically for the missionary childhood, we are in charge to help the children in the church, but also in the school, together with the family, to grow in their witness, in their faith.
Well, Sister, thank you so much for your time today. We really enjoy speaking to you. Sister Roberta Tremarelli, General Secretary of the Pontifical Society of the Holy Childhood. Thank you again. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you to you. Thank you.
And finally tonight, researchers in Antarctica have begun a project to find ice that might be more than 1 million years old. The scientists are from Italy and France, and they are working in conditions that can reach 76 degrees below zero. They are hoping to drill more than 8,000 feet into the ice. The research likely will provide clues on the history of the temperature of the Earth. Very neat stuff. All right, well, we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.